Good morning and welcome to the MSSRF seminar series. We have with us today Professor Rajib Shaw. He is a director of India-Japan Laboratory, Keio University, and the co-founder of Resilience, Resilience Innovation Knowledge Academy and RIKA Institute. And we will be talking on unpacking of certain IPCC observation and beyond. Just to give you a little brief introduction to the speaker, he is also the co-founder of the Delhi-based social entrepreneurship startup, which I had already mentioned, the RIKA Institute. And he's also a distinguished professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. And if my pronunciation is not right, it's the Sichuan University in China. Dr. Shaw is a senior fellow of the Institute of Global Environmental Strategies, Japan, and the chairperson of Seeds Asia and CWS Japan, both Japanese NGOs. His expertise includes community-based disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, urban risk management, and disaster and environmental education. Professor Shaw is a recipient of the Parvasi Bharatiya Samman Award. This was in 2021 for his contribution in the education sector. He was also the highest honor conferred by the overseas Indians and persons of Indian origin from the President of India. He is also a recipient of the United Nations Sasa Kawa Award for disaster risk reduction in 2022 and Okada Award. Okay, this is for Implementation Science Award 2022, and this was specifically given for the integration disaster risk management. So welcome, Professor Shaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Namaskar, and good morning. It's an honor and privilege to be here in your premium institute. And I was just telling your executive director that I had a long association. It's not a direct association, rather indirect association, because many of my students, Japanese students, my Swiss student, my Brazilian student, they spend internship in Madras University, but they actually worked in many of your field areas, especially on community-based mangrove management. And my first visit to those areas were after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. As you can imagine, you know it much better that many of these mangroves actually saved lots of villages in the coastal areas, especially in the Chidambaram district and so on. So, but it is the first time actually I am here in this campus, it's a beautiful campus, so thank you very much. I already got this introduction, just I would like to focus that, yes, I get my salary from Keio University. That's my part and parcel, but only that's part of my academia work. But I think the work which we do is we don't do only pure science or pure technology related work. We work with different stakeholders. One of my main work is with the science policy interface. So I chair this Asia Pacific Science Technology Advisory Group of United Nations, and also I was the CLA for the IPCC lead of IPCC, the 6th assessment report. Some of you are possibly aware that it was released last year. So that's the science policy, and then we do a little bit of startup innovation and NGOs. And today I thought that maybe I will talk a little bit on this IPCC work, but going a little bit beyond the IPCC work and bringing climate change disaster risk. We used 3 slides initially to show that this risk, dynamic risk landscape, what is happening. I'm not sure whether you are following this World Economic Forum. Every year in January, it will be around maybe 3rd week of January, they publish the they call the Global Risk Outlook. And that is the overall risk portfolio of the world, and it is in January, so that means it is last year's analysis. And they have been started this in 2007, and as you know, that being a World Economic Forum, their main interest was the economic risk, how the economic risks are interconnected. But then they found that there is not just an isolated economic risk which matters, but it's very much related to the environmental risk, then societal risk, technological risk, geopolitical risk. So there are so much of different types of risk. But you are seeing in the color coding, the most easiest thing is the green one, which is the environmental risk. And if you see that 2010, 12 onward, there will be lots of boxes, green boxes, which are arising. And these are the top 5 in terms of the likelihood in the top and impacts on the bottom. And what are those boxes? It's difficult to read all these things, but this is one is the climate change, one is the disasters, biodiversity losses, climate inactions, and so on. So this was 2020. This was 2021. As you can imagine, the 2021 means the analysis of 2020, when we had already experienced the COVID. So you can see the infectious disease on the left-hand side, it becomes the high impact risk. But 2 things actually arise which were not there earlier, but you are seeing on the right-hand side, likelihoods. And those are digital power concentration and digital inequality. As you will possibly imagine that in 2020, we changed our working style, work from home. Many people started education from home. We had also the digital healthcare systems and so on. So all these digital dependency was very high. We are possibly the privileged one to have lots of good digital connectivity, but not everyone has that, especially in the rural area. The rural school may not have the digital connectivity. So there are quite a bit of impacts on the education, healthcare in the rural areas. And that gap between urban, rural, between even, say, for example, in Japan, I can say, yes, the young group, they are very tech savvy and they are very good digitally well aware. But we have a digital, we call it's a bad term actually, we call digital illiterate people. And that is, of course, the aged population. And with a huge aged population in Japan, this group is quite increasing, and they even don't use still. They even don't use smartphone because they don't see the interest. We did actually, some of our students did that smartphone penetration in the small villages in Japan, and that was a very interesting study. But anyway, this digital divide is a new risk which is coming. And that's actually an important thing. Last year report, 2022, if you see 0 to 2 years, cyber security failure, digital inequality, adverse technological advances, and so on, which come. But if you see the top 3 risks, climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity losses. So the point here is that the risk, the overall global risk is changing over time. But many times we have is that we have a risk management plan at the national level, at the state level, at the district level, which was possibly written 10 years back, 15 years back. We are using the same risk management plan to address the new risks which are arising. And that's where the discrepancy arises. And that's the major challenge which we need to keep in mind. The focus on the climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So that on the right-hand side, what you are seeing, that was from the global assessment report of the UNDRR. So, and that was in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019. And this is like possibly, they give a very strong message in the global assessment report that the risk reduction should be with what is written in the right side is the living with uncertainties. So how we different types of decision making need to have this uncertainty thing. And that's a major challenge because many times like uncertainties, those who work on this uncertainty field or even in the climate field, you will be able to know that if you tell, like I work with many times local governors or local mayors, like the city mayors and so on. And when you say that the climate projection or climate downscaling, what we call, so when you do the climate downscaling, it was very good to see in the, very good to tell in the IPCC report that southern part of coastal India will have this much of sea level rise by 2050, 2070, 2100. But for a district administration, what does it mean? They need what will be the very specific sea level rise in next 5 years, in next 10 years, in next 15 years. But what we do is usual projection is the far future and more regional scale. But the downscaling challenge is the near future and in the local scale. And when you do the local scale near future projection, then the uncertainty becomes so high. It's very difficult to convince a mayor or a governor or even a district collector that, okay, you add this much of additional budget for climate proofing of your particular area. And that's a major challenge, but we have to actually, we can't wait and see that, okay, when we will have a very good downscaling model and then we will only use that particular model. So we have to address this type of uncertainty and making this risk. And this right-hand side, the lower one is this our new IPCC report. This left-hand side photograph is very famous. This is our IPCC AR5, Assessment Report 5, where we talked about these different types of vulnerability, exposures, and so on. But then in this particular report, and that's a major, actually, I will say, major point is we talked about climate resilient development. Because ultimately, here we stop up to understanding the vulnerability, but how you bring those vulnerability issues into development practices. And that's a major challenge. And this particular IPCC report has, in every chapter, I was in charge of the Asia regional chapter, including our regional chapter or even the subject-specific chapter like water or food or energy and so on, health. We try to focus that how a climate resilient development pathways we can actually address to. And that's a major challenge or major shift in the IPCC's new assessment report. In IPCC definition, we tell this at the upper level statement, like the floods, drought, and fire. These are the affecting, we all know that one, but there are good scientific evidence. I must also mention you that that IPCC, like I worked as the CLA for 4 years, and then before that, the previous IPCC report, I was a contributing author. So my association with IPCC goes to maybe around 5+4, almost close to 8-9 years and so on. And what we were taught is that IPCC is not a prescriptive report. It does not prescribe that the government should be doing this, that. IPCC just only provides scientific evidence. And if there is a gap area, that means there are not enough science has been done. Because our ultimate analysis, the basis of our ultimate analysis is peer-reviewed journal paper. We try to avoid as much as possible gray literature. Say, for example, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, many different types, this type of development bank, they have published different types of reports. We cannot make them, it's not that we cannot use them, but there are different levels of confidence statement in IPCC. If it is, say, for example, 10 peer-reviewed journal paper, and that all the 10 journal papers are telling that, okay, this will be the future trend, then your confidence level is very high. But if that is told by World Bank report, UN report, or ADB report, then these are, we call the gray literature. And it's not that these are bad. We need to incorporate that sometimes, but the confidence level goes down. And that's how this whole IPCC process works. So there are many different ways, and like it was in my chapter in Asia, it was around 150 pages. 150 pages. We had 11 lead authors, then around 50 contributing authors, and so on. We spent 4 years of intensive work. And then I now started questioning myself that the relevance of all this IPCC work. It's a very robust work. It's very important. Understanding science is very important. But you know that the societal things changes over time. And we make an analysis, this IPCC 1 period is around 7 years. And we make an assessment report at the 7th year. And then the relevance of it becomes so low, not low, the relevance of it, I will say that it becomes weaker because the world, different types of social issues coming up. As I mentioned, the risk landscape is changing and so on. So how we incorporate those into IPCC report, that's a major challenge. And another thing is that more than this assessment report, I think one of the strong focus of the IPCC report is the thematic report. Like they have a report on ocean, they have a report on the land, they have a report on the 1.5 degree. Then the next report will be coming on the cities. So these are the thematic area where the climate change impacts are more prominent, and that assessment becomes more robust. So we have a graphic team, so we have done lots of detection and attribution thing, like ecosystem, water, food, health, cities, economic damages, displacement, etc. So these are a few different types of impacts. And then, of course, we have the adaptation, sustainable development. And here also in this report, we talked about these limits to adaptation. It's not that we can solve each and every problem with adaptation. There are certain limits, and it's very important to understand those limits to adaptation. So all the graphics, like these are some example, like the climate change on agriculture on the left-hand side. So this was since Asia chapter we had from Cambodia to China to Thailand to Philippines to India, different types of agriculture product, and whether it will be temperature impact, whether it will be rainfall, and then moisture contents and so on. Then also health part. On the right-hand side, what you are seeing is the health impact and so on. So there are quite a bit of this type of water, health, agriculture, tourism, transport, then biodiversity. So this type of things were there. If I have to say a few highlights, so we all possibly recognize that the cities and especially the critical infrastructure that gets has a major high vulnerability, and this is not just the infrastructure as an isolated thing. It is related to other systems. So whether it is the food, water, energy, job. So how we see this as a more systemic approach, I think that's a major important thing we highlighted in this particular report. We also highlighted this impacts, economic and social impacts across boundary. So the interconnectivity of different, the boundaries can be actually different level. Boundary can be the ecosystem boundary can be political boundary, the countries. Boundary even can be the state boundaries. Like we know that in India, the state, the water sharing between the states, it becomes so challenging. It becomes political issues and so on. So, but we need to possibly look at more different issues. And this thing is the maladaptation or short-term adaptation. So, for example, I worked quite extensively in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. That area is a little bit so-called dry area. It's an undulated topography, and the rainfall on an average is around 1,000 millimeter per year. 1,000 millimeter is not a bad rainfall compared to the global average and so on. But on Bangladesh, the average rainfall is around 1,800, but that area is around 1,000. With some World Bank projects, so they did lots of deep irrigation programs, like they have very high tech, like the metered, like they have the SIM card, so you just put it has all the GPS locations, you just put it in the system, then it will automatically release that much of water. So you have to buy the water for your agriculture purposes, which is quite good. It actually helped lots of farmers, and that has been used as the best practices. But of course, what we see is possibly when we use, all of you, many of you are working in the climate field, biodiversity field, you know it, that when we use water, there needs to be some recharging of the water from somewhere. So where we have that recharging part, so unless we have the proper recharging from somewhere, whom I am seeing? Oh, my goodness, I'm talking about Bangladesh. You come here, and I sit there. You should be talking about that. Oh my goodness. They are my students, and Satomi and Habiba. Habiba is from Bangladesh. The example which I am talking about, she will be able to explain that more better than me. She is an agriculture officer from the government of Bangladesh. And Satomi did her work in Chennai slum area. She had many health problems, but she never gave up. She stayed here in Chennai, and she loves Chennai actually. Wow, that's a big surprise. Wow. Let's finish my lecture quickly, and then we will hear from them maybe. Yeah. So the point here is that yes, the agriculture part was good, but then the depletion of the underground water was a major challenge. So it is a good adaptation practice, yes or no? There is a big question on that. So that's what we call the maladaptation. So for example, in the coastal, when we worked in Sri Lanka, due to the coastal erosion, so there are many, like even I saw some of the schools were washed away due to coastal erosion. And then there were like, we made the seawall. So, okay, that's a temporary adaptation measure, but it has a very strong impact on the local biodiversity because we are changing the natural flow. So these are like the short-term adaptation, but it has possibly a longer environmental implication. So in this IPCC report, we very strongly focused on this one, like how you can make this maladaptation or short-term adaptation like that. Now, I would just spend maybe a few minutes to explain about some governance mechanism. Very specifically, we explained in this IPCC report, as I mentioned, that it's not only just the science part of it, we also focused on climate resilient development pathways. And this is the very specific areas we talked about on the urban-rural linkage, urban-rural connectivity. We know that many times our administrative boundaries are fixed. So when Chennai Municipal Corporation has to do something, it's only within the Chennai Municipal Corporation measures. And that's how the budgets and all these things are defined. But if you see the resource dependency of Chennai city on whether it is food, whether it is water, whether it is energy, whether it is human resources, that has a very strong flow from the peri-urban as well as in the rural area. Most of possibly the food products come from maybe the agriculture's products in some of the other areas and so on. So how we can have a more urban-rural collective resilience, and that has been a major focus in some of my PhD students' work. But also we try to focus on this one in this IPCC work because Japan, in its 5th basic environmental plan of the Ministry of Environment of Government of Japan, they introduced this system called RCS, Regional Circular Ecological Sphere, RCES. And they are like the forest and cities or the urban areas and rural areas collaboration became very important. I give you a concrete example. This is the city where I live. It is called Yokohama. And we have the prefecture called Kanagawa Prefecture. In prefecture, prefecture is not like state, like in India. So it's not as big as that. It's not has that much of jurisdiction, but I will say maybe district type of thing. So in Kanagawa Prefecture, they started a forest and water management tax, a new taxation system. You can have in Japan, there are like the national tax, but there can be local taxes, which can be started by the prefectures based on the local condition. So almost 15 years back, the prefecture government, they started this 950 yen, close to $8 per year per household tax. And what was the argument of that? Like to have a good water resource of Kanagawa, our main water bodies or the catchment area is in the mountain. And that is in the upstream of the most of the river. So unless we have a proper forest management in that particular area, we won't be able to get good quality of water. And that was the scientific evidence, it was there. So then how we actually give a new tax. Of course, $8 per year per household is not a big amount compared to income, the lifestyle in Japan. We're living in Kanagawa. But then any additional tax anywhere in the world, people are not happy. Why should we pay? And then many of the catchment area is actually in the neighboring prefecture. So many people argue that why we will use our prefecture tax to make the forest management in the neighboring prefecture. Why? So there are lots of town hall meetings, small meetings to get people sensitized with proper scientific evidence. The governor himself, with some of the scientific groups, some of my colleagues from different universities, they were also part of that. So they do this type of scientific, town hall meetings. And then finally, they did initially first year, they did, before they put the tax, they made a pilot area where actually they cut some of the trees and planted new trees and make a proper forest management and showed very specific critical evidence that this was the impact of, if we do, so this will be the impact on that. But the very important part was this governance mechanism. And in Japan, when we have any committee, like most of them are the professors, academicians, and all these things. Like it's like the shared responsibility. The government, they love to have the academicians, and the professors are telling like that. But here in this particular place, that there were 50% member who are from the academics. Of course, we need technical people. But 50%, they made rest of the 50%, 25% were from the civil society, like the NGOs, non-government organizations, non-profit organizations. And rest of the 25, they were the common citizen. Any person who is living in Kanagawa prefecture for more than 3 years, if he or she is interested, then you can be part of that particular system. So it was a very transparent decision making. Then they had, like every year, they make it all the document, like how they have used it, the expenses public. Then in 5 years, they have a review system for that. But ultimately, the main important thing is that, like the support conservation activities in upstream prefecture, because that's where the main important thing is the connectivity of the rural and the urban area. This is just one example of the water resources, and this is from Bangladesh, where we are actually working on this Belai Bill. This Belai Bill means it's a wetland area, northern part of Dhaka, and between Dhaka and there is another city called Gazipur. And this area has a huge biodiversity and lots of different types of fishes. And this area also is like it works as a sort of sponge area. Like if it is flooded before the water enters into the Dhaka city, this area is a buffer area actually for that particular thing. But there have been it has been the sources of livelihoods for almost 300,000 people and so many of different species of fish. But now there have been a reduction of this. Wetland and lots of filling. Now some of them are becoming the resort, some of them are becoming some new industrial areas and so on. So what we try to do is, again, like we try to, and there are a few government industry as well. So the little bit of pollutions were there. So what our main target was there, again, to establish a very similar type of activity as a model from Japan, is a more as a governance model of collective decision making between urban and rural areas. So how we can make that collective things together. And this is one example from one of my PhD students' work in Nagpur. And they are again the same thing on the food energy issues. And Nagpur, now being a quite highly developed city and very fast development, and so water usage becomes quite high and all those type of things. So we're doing quite similar type of work and making the connectivity. So I think what I'm trying to point out here, and we had quite a bit of publications, and most of the publications are available in my website. So there's urban-rural partnership examples from Japan. So there are around 8 or 9 examples. Some are citizen participation, some are civil society participation, some are private sector participations, and so on. So different stakeholders who work together. So that's a very, very important part. And many of this work actually went into the IPCC, the sixth assessment report as a governance document. Because as I mentioned, and I highlight once again, like my little contribution to this IPCC sixth assessment report was that yes, science is important, but we can't always say that climate science, this will be the projected impact, this and that. But ultimately, we need to provide solutions and how we can make an adaptive governance mechanism, how we can make a more science-based decision making. I think those are very, very important. And for that, of course, technology has a very strong role to play, and as well as different types of new emerging approach is also very important. I won't go possibly into detail of that. This one also we explained a little bit on the systemic and cascading risk. So as you, like I mentioned that there are health system, food system, then possibly the biodiversity system, water management system, and then these are all different types of connected. So one trigger somewhere is possibly have a cascading impact, and how we can actually approach this as a systemic risk. There have been, like in the UN, they have been using this for systemic risk perspective for some time, but there are very little actual detailed research. So now currently I must say that I still don't understand it fully. We're still learning on how to do this systemic risk approach. So we developed this little bit of framework for as a scoping study with the UN in 2021, taking COVID as an example, how it is impacting different systems. But now we are actually working on two states in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh and try to see the coastal infrastructure, especially the port system, and how the ports as a critical infrastructure is connected to different types of goods and services, whether it is the food services, whether it is the exporting, importing of different types of elements and so on. So yes, we touched this briefly, the systemic risk, but we have not gone into detail. But maybe, as I mentioned, that in IPCC, there will be the special report on cities in between, like from this year onward, it will start. And again, the cities or the urban system is a very classic example of this type of systemic risk approach. And I'm very much looking forward to that learning. And this is one of our recent book, Climate Change and Disasters, where Renga Lakshmi and one of colleague has written a chapter on this particular book. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Professor Shah. But before we begin with the questions, I'd like to apologize to the audience online. Messages being that we have to stop the presentation online for a bit, and then we started somewhere in the middle. So those online, we to see all of your slides. So I'd like to apologize for that. So now we take questions both from here as well as those with us online. Check the online and other questions from anybody who joined us online? If there's something we can see in the chat box, but I think there's nothing as of now. Would anybody have a question for Professor Shah?
Professor Shah, thank you very much for this very inspiring lecture, and also showing how people are ready to pay for the ecosystem services they receive. You showed the Japan example. What about the case in Bangladesh as well as in the Nagpur experiment? Because the kind of situations are completely different from a developed perspective, from the developed nation to developing nations perspective. How exactly these are all changing? What are all the gaps, and how exactly we need to go again? Yeah,
thank you. It's a very relevant and important question. We actually did an analysis of willingness to pay with the Nagpur resident. Of course, it's not uniform. The result was around 78% they are willing to pay. 78% of residents whom we surveyed were around 600 plus people. But then different age, it's very interesting, different age group have different interest on what that money should be used. And in many of the urban area, one of the major challenge is the water leakage because of the poor old infrastructure. And I give you an example, like I worked in Kathmandu. In Kathmandu, 32%, I repeat, 32% of the water is leaked because of this joint of these pipelines and different types of leakage in the pipelines and so on. So the younger population, younger means like mid-20s to 40s, these people, they wanted the money to be used to improve the urban water infrastructure. So they wanted to put that, and they told that we don't mind that if we pay, and we also give them the buffer that how much you want to pay. They even went to 500 rupees per month per household, but they wanted the meter system. There are like in many of the, as you know, that in many of our cities, the water meter is not proper or something. It is there, it is not working, maybe in the old style meter and all those type of things. But little bit older generation who are older means I consider myself as old, so maybe 50 plus. He is much older than me, so 50 plus possibly that age group, they wanted to use the money for actually restoring the upstream water sources, because they told that it was not there 40 years back. When they were a child in Nagpur, they were seeing a different types of quality of water. But over 40 years, the total, like both in terms of quality and quantity, water has a major stress. So they wanted to make more. They told that yes, we are willing to pay, but let's use that money for betterment of the upstream area. But this younger generation was more willing to make the betterment of the infrastructure. So that was quite interesting difference what we saw in the age group.
Sorry, one more question. See, for example, when you say taxation for reviving a forest above, whether the today they are developing, but what is the issues of sustainability? Okay, so how you really cost it, and how you also said in Japan you yourself participated in many of the decision-making systems and so on. So how do you ensure sustainability in these kind of issues?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. In Japan, what we do is that they make a 20-year plan. Within 20 years, of course, there will be lots of changes. We don't know what will be the scenario after 20 years. But every 5 years, there is a check and review process. Within 5 years, next 5 years, we will be doing these 20 things, 20 action points. Then we will see that what of these 20 really worked, what did not work. Possibly new issues come, so we'll add that one and then bring it in the forward. So the sustainability is, it's like in Japan, we have always call this as a PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, and action. So it's a cyclic process of quality control, and that quality control issue actually leads to the sustainability, because you can't make a plan for sustainability for an uncertain world. As I mentioned, that the living with uncertainty, we don't know what are the new risks which are coming. So we have to actually be prepared that yes, I know that I have a plan, I know that I'm doing something, I may not be doing perfect, but I will be adaptive enough, I will be accommodative enough to at least address some of the new risks which may arise 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. So that's how the sustainability issue with this PDCA cycle is addressed. Thank you.
Professor.
Yes.
Yeah. This is also related to the charging ecosystem services. My question is, have you done any historical analysis on the socio-economic political aspects of declining ecosystem services? Say, for example, since you are taking water, I give an example from water itself. If the urban city population is not getting a protected water, what were the reasons for this declining trend? How this the public investment spent on enhancing this water availability? So have you done any such analysis and bring those findings into your recommendations previously? It includes in Japan, Bangladesh, and also India. This question is important when you talk about declining groundwater level. So we generally recommend that we should stop using groundwater, and one way is to charge the users. But the thing is, do we take adequate step to enhance surface water availability through public investment? So I just want to know some more details about your research in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I should say that I don't do any analysis. It's the work which my students do. I just make the presentation. So all credit actually goes to these people. But I had actually one example of this Philippines. We did some analysis on the ecosystem services and the historical changes in some of the Philippines. It's called barangay, which is the local unit. And it was very interesting that before 1980s, it was more like when the regime, the political regime, depending on the political regime, the governance system actually is quite different. Some of the, before 1980s, they had a political regime which were very strong centralized governance system. So central government, the president or the ministry will do everything. Mid-80s, they had a very strong decentralization which started. And that decentralization actually helped the strengthening the local governance. So they gave more power to the barangay captain. Barangay captain is like the bhupati, like he is the elected person from the people. This is not the mayor, but it's like the local village head type of thing. And they also established, so that it started that giving more power to the local decision maker or the local elected people, but then only power will not help unless they have the funding mechanism. So what they did is that they made very specific barangay development fund, which have been established. And that was, that took a little bit longer time, early 90s to mid 90s, it is the barangay development fund, which was established. And then it was very interesting that they do lots of development activity, but then one disaster comes and all those type of things, everything is washed away. So Philippines all means possibly an example of one of the very few countries who had mentioned in their law, in the national legislation, that 3% of this development fund can be used for risk reduction. So if you see that, yes, there are some challenges in the slopes or something, so you can actually use this 3% of the development fund. So yes, it's very, very important that how the socioeconomic changes affect different types of governance decision making. And so thank you for making that example.
We'll just a couple of quick comments. One is, I think, IPCC has, a very large number of authors. And so when, everybody is devoted to their angle on the subject. But when it comes to the outreach and the high-level points, perhaps some of the messaging gets somewhat distorted. So, for instance, and I am particularly concerned with that because having worked as a negotiator in many of these reports. So, for instance, on irrigation, if you look at the summary for policymakers, I think that it's a little more nuanced than the way you brought it up here. I would say because eventually irrigation is a necessity for agriculture. So, and obviously there is no crop that does not do better with adequate water supply. So the challenge is to balance the one and the other. The depletion aspect of this thing. For instance, West Bengal is a very good example where the depletion aspect is completely overstated in a state where there is no depletion problem of groundwater at all. except in very isolated pockets. And as a result, farmers are not being allowed to expand irrigation when in fact they could. So the Aditi Mukherjee has a good important paper on this. So that I think we need more nuance in the headline statements. The second comment I have is that, you see, local governance in developed countries in many ways will appear to work smoother than local governance in developing countries. Developing countries, there will be a lot of challenges. That is why we are a developing country, otherwise we would be a developed country. But I think if you look at the larger picture, Japan has cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases is way above its share in the global population. It is like, enormously more. The second point is Japan walked out of the Kyoto Protocol, despite the fact that it was the Kyoto Protocol. Similarly, Japan has very little regard for equity in climate negotiations. They are a laggard, right next to Australia, for instance. So there is something about, you can do a lot of things locally, but sometimes you have to be careful that local governance is all very well, but the larger picture is being lost completely. So for instance, just to end with this example, Japan's long-term low emissions development strategy is about on par in terms of specificity with India's long-term low emissions development strategy. So you argued that, how can we project for 20 years, 30 years, there is uncertainty. But on the other hand, Japan is equally vociferous in insisting that India should sign up to net zero. Even though for a developing country, the uncertainties are higher. So I think focusing on the local does not always solve the problems which we face in the larger scales. So it doesn't smoothly grow from local scales to the bigger scales. That would be my comment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, I should say that not fully, but I partially agree with you. You are right that the local problems does not solve, that's for sure. But again, not all of us are politicians, not all of us are climate negotiators. So at least what we can do something which are local things. The weighing of the evidence. Yes. That is the issue, and it is precisely the challenge of the science. That's sure. That's I agree with you. Thank you.
We don't have questions online, so if this will be the last question, then we will close.
Just a reaction.
Okay, finish this and then.
Yeah, the $8 the tax. Just I wanted to know how it was arrived at, and is it uniform? Most of the taxes are progressive. Like even this is a household level tax. So was it uniformly put over everybody? How it was arrived, and related to that is these problems are long-term and global in scale. Yes, they do have local level. So how do we expect at the local level to understand and that willingness to pay will be for some local issues? They are paying for that. So how it is integrated with the larger? That's a good important point again. First is yes, these taxes are uniform irrespective of the socioeconomic status. It's not incremental, so it's just only $8 per year per household, which have been there for last at least 16 years now. because initially it started with a 20-year plan, and maybe after 20 years, they will make an evaluation that what worked, what did not work. But as I mentioned earlier, that the contents, how the tax will be used, that actions are changing, that actually try to address the different emerging challenges. And these are local government taxes, so I don't think that they are trying to link for any global issues here. So it's more, this very specific, this tax purpose is to have a proper catchment area for the sustainability of the water resources in that particular prefecture. So it's very, very targeted. We are not talking about the climate change issues here and this thing. Yes, yes, of course. So that's why I told that initially first 1 year, they did not put any tax. They were just doing the government, the local government actually put some pilot area, and then there were a few institutes who actually worked together, and there was scientific evidence which was derived. And then we got scientific evidence. Still, again, the people are not that happy. But so with that scientific evidence, the government had to do many town hall meeting to make that awareness that, okay, look, there are some evidence. It may not be perfect, but at least with this level of evidence, it says that it worked.
Industry pays the same rate or pays something higher?
No, this was household. The industry has a different. This is not for the industry water. This is only for the household water supply. Industry has a different scheme.
So this covers only
Domestic water.
Dr. Chairman, we'll move to a question which is online. I think Rajesh raised his hand. So Rajesh, do you have a question? Rajesh, are you online?
Hello.
Please
Good
go
afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, Rajesh, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon, all, and thank you, Rajib sir, for this very nice presentation. It is not a specific question, but I thought of relating it to a couple of works we were doing here in Kerala. That kind of Japanese Kanagawa prefecture. So we were also happy to associate with a couple of Japanese projects, for example, the Satayama Initiative and IGIS, and later Asia Pacific Network for Social Research. So we were trying to understand that a couple of rivers, health management in the Kuttanad region of Kerala. So Kuttanad, as you know, it's a below sea level farming system, and there is an upper catchment area in the Western Ghats. So it was interesting to note that a couple of reflections from the stakeholders were right into the kind of taxation, which is unfortunately not in position. For example, there is a couple of temples in the uphills, like the very populated Shabarimala temple, which has got many pollution issues to the Kuttanad lower region. So I just thought of making this to your notice. If you have a chance to go to this kind of a couple of works where we do here in Kuttanad, it would be nice. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think it's more as a comment. Yeah.
You want to react?
Just a quick reaction to my colleague that he has mentioned about global versus local. I think that's a very important point. But I personally was involved with the it was categorical and also encouraged to all of us that the time has gone. I'm talking about 2004. At that point of time, it was said that the time has gone, that we only talk about global issues. Perhaps we need to see that whether some of the global issues have been originated at the local level or not. So it is important and of paramount importance that we should also try to look at small local issues, which can potentially become one day global issues. So we are encouraged to look at local solutions also for local problems, and then try to see that whether it could be having kind of global impact as well. And that's why nowadays, many places we are now talking about global plus local concept. So that's what I was trying to understand, that where we should now go, the global first and look at the local first, like that way. But my personal understanding is that I need to look at the local problem and then look at the global, and that's what I feel. Coming to one point that you mentioned, I just would like to know, in Japan, in Kanagawa, when it started, because today the generation who are facing the problem, it may be the actions of previous generation. Is there any kind of thinking that in a polluter pays principle, if I go back, that if I am doing in this generation something, whether some kind of extra load and the previous generation, we are now getting affected because one day it will come. If not today, tomorrow it will come. The future generation would look back and say that we are facing this difficulty because of previous generation. Is there any kind of discussion at DRR network?
I don't think that we have discussed this one. There are quite a bit of political discussions on that. And it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. Japan's bullet train, it comes with a cost, comes with an environmental cost, but it gives lots of convenience. You travel 600 kilometers within 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And now, can the young generation blame to the older generation that it's you who made this bullet train destroying the environment, but they're using it. They're using it for that. So maybe Satomi will be able to tell it much better, that being a younger generation, how does he feel about the elder generation? But I think it's a trade-off and balance between these. But instead of going this generational issue, but at least there is an agreement that what we are leaving is something for the future generation, and how we can make our collective future better. And collective future is when I become older, when my son become even more, little bit mature, when he or she has another generation created. So it's more like that type of, instead of blaming the past, I think I will say that the most of Japan's environment-related discourse are in that futuristic vision rather than blaming the past. I mean, that's what I can say, but I don't know whether it is right or wrong.
I was just wondering whether you would like to introduce your students to all of us, and then we can close.
Very well established, so they can introduce themselves. I work after a long time, I want to listen to your English. Oh, you can speak in Tamil.
Vanakkam. My name is Satomi Inoue. 10 years ago, I've been here in Chennai for 3 or 4 months to do my research in Chennai. And at that time, my research topic was how to reduce disaster risk at the slums of Chennai. Then I did research here, and many people, the student of Madras University helped me a lot. So, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I remember still. My findings at that time was to reduce disaster risks in slums of Chennai would be different from place to place, because they had a different kind of social networks or bondings in the place. And some slums have, in some slums, there was strong, how do you say, strong leader, and he can actually have good instruction for local people how to escape from disaster. But in different place, there was not strong leader, but they had good relationship and strong bondings among the people, so they can help with they can help each other, and it would help reduce disaster risk in that area. So if we have to think about disaster, some measure in slums to reduce disaster risks, and then we have to have good information from each area. It was my finding. So thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Omar Habiban. I am actually government officer at the Ministry of Agriculture. I came here actually with medical purposes. When I saw this morning Rajib is here, I could not stop myself to meet with him. That's why I come here. And I completed my PhD on 2012, and I also did postdoc from the same with Rajib. And my research that time focuses on the drought in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. And I basically agriculturist, and my background is all mainly focusing on the agriculture purposes. So during that time, in my findings, I actually focused on the result actually shows that the farmers' adaptation practices in the drought affected areas. Nice to meet you all. Thank you. Thank you. There is almost one.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Divya Suresh. As I'm a native of Chennai, I've been in Japan for some time, like for some years, and I was working in some IT companies. Recently, I've started my PhD. I'm a first-year PhD student under Shaw Sensei. So my research broadly is on the climate-smart agriculture. So I'm going to focus on India-Japan agro-technology collaboration for the case of Tamil Nadu. So the objective of the research would primarily focus on looking at the information dissemination system for agriculture, and see the possibilities, explore possibilities and the scope for integrating such kind of information, agro-information dissemination systems model of Japan with Tamil Nadu. Yeah, so that is about my research in brief. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw, for also the students also for introducing themselves. And for those online, thank you for joining us. We'll close the seminar today. Thank you.